Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Ball and Breakfast podcast. With Wayne, I'm Patrick. Coming to you tonight, talking about football and Netflix and kind of their convergence here on a couple of documentaries that Wayne and I have watched recently. The first one is Untold Johnny Football, which covers Johnny Manziel. The second one's called Untold Swamp Kings, talking about the University of Florida and their run in the mid 2000s with Tim Tebow and Urban Myers. So if you're out there and you still haven't seen either of those documentary series on Netflix, go and check them out. We will kind of go into a deep dive on both and talk about our thoughts, good and bad, about each one. And I guess to start it off, we're going to talk about the Johnny Football documentary. So detailing the career of Johnny Manziel, both at Texas A&M, his progression onto the Cleveland Browns. They did touch a little bit into his backstory, his upbringing, his high school career, and all that. And for most of us who know Johnny's story and kind of where he's at today, it definitely took a right-hand turn away from success and glory on the field. But Wayne, I'm just going to tee that one up for you pretty straightforwardly. Just what was your thoughts, I guess, watching the Johnny Football documentary series, and like what were some of your main takeaways?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Yeah, man, this documentary, it was pretty intense. I feel like it was like watching, you know, I think it's kind of biblical in a way. Like, there's been so many stories, like in the Bible, right, where it's like this, like was it Samson, right? Like this indestructible force, like I guess quarterback in this case, all of a sudden gets slain by not some big strong linebacker, but by greed, by money, by going with a certain lifestyle, right? And I think that was like the biggest, I guess, theme that I saw or noticed here was just that how consumed that Johnny Manziel was with money, right? He brought that he was really pissed off about the NCAA, and rightfully so, right? With regards to kind of using his likeness for profit. There was that big mention, or I think there was like somebody that looked into this. Texas A&M got $750 million in donations. I think in that off season after the Johnny Manziel Heisman Trophy season there, and to kind of bring that in perspective, I think in that same off season, the rest of the entire SEC combined for $250 million. The entire SEC. We're not. That's not the Pac-12, Pac-10, or whatever it is. Big Ten. No, it's SEC. So it's like and the Alabamas and Georgias and all that. So that just goes to show. And then how much did Johnny Manziel get from that? $0. I mean, sure, boarding, couple classes he didn't attend, right? Like, you know, yeah, pennies on the dollar with regards to how much the university got. And then, there's an argument made now, right, where they renovated their stadium, used those $750 million in donations, right, to fund the rebuild of their stadium. And then it's like, okay, now does Texas A&M get Jimbo Fisher and all the money that they spend on him now, going more in the modern day age for Texas A&M? Uh, Basically, Menzel helped build that program. So I guess there is some warrant for him being pissed off, but you see that how it just consumed him. And it's kind of like this tale of, okay, you can go one way, feel resentment, and just let that eat you up, get high, get drunk all the time, which he evidently did. Or you can just be like, you know what? Yeah, that's just how the game is played. I'm just gonna make the most of it because he isn't the most. I mean, he there has been more talented players to come about, right? Obviously, he was a freshman, and maybe that played a little bit into the the maturation of him getting that stardom at an early time. But we see like the Peyton Mannings in the world, and Tim Tebow even, right, get a lot of hype early on, and then they still are able to make the most of whatever situation and not completely fuck up their life, right? So I don't know. For me, it was kind of this tale of he went this way when he could have gone that way, and that really kind of destroyed at least his football career. And it kind of ends right in a sour kind of taste where it's like, has he solved all his demons? Like, is he kind of progressing? Because like the first scene, right, it was like just him partying with his boys right there in Scottsdale. So it seems like he has more of a relationship with his dad and such. So at least there's some progress there, it feels like, but for his sake and his story, it definitely feels like there's more to be told. I think he's had stints in the was a Canadian Football League or something like that, or one of those other football leagues. So, but at the end of the day, with all the promise in the world, man, it just seems like he kind of fumbled the ball, not to use the football analogy, on what could have potentially been a successful football career, just given all his natural talent, because he wasn't trying that hard, apparently, like outside of the football field. Like, it all kind of seemed instinctual and natural to him. So yeah, just kind of a tale of what could have been, I think, for Johnny Manziel. But what do you think, Pat? What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, this one was a tough, one for me because I did see obviously a kid who, was attracted to the fame, to the money, to, you know, being in the spotlight, to, hanging with some of the coolest athletes around and kind of soaking it all up, while he was the hottest thing, pretty much going in sports and media in that time. I think there's like two major issues for me though when it comes to folks that just want to take a very critical look at Johnny and Johnny alone. I think that you're kind of alluding to some of it from Texas A&M side where you're making all this money off the backs of your athletes, and for that kind of money pouring in because he won the Heisman, like to those types of levels. I know at the time, the NIL stuff wasn't really a thing, and these guys weren't getting paid, but man, that is just a sour one for him to swallow. But I think the you know, biggest thing for me here is his coaches really failed him. I really do think they failed him in this. I mean, Sumlin and Kingsbury not only allowed, Johnny to kind of, play at the level that he did, but then kind of allow him also to walk all over them as coaches. He practiced when he wanted to. He, showed up hungover for games. And it was almost like Kingsbury was laughing throughout the entire documentary about who Johnny was at that time and how they kind of treated him. And, it kind of reflects on Kingsbury at this point because you look at what he's done in Arizona, and it was kind of like he was that sexy hire, and him and Kyler were boys, and it was like he never really held any of those guys accountable in Arizona, and now he's back in the college scene as an assistant, and maybe that's what's kind of best for Cliff. I don't know if he's a true leader, so I think the first thing for me is like we're dealing with a kid who's anywhere from 18 to 21, trying to make life decisions all the while just playing football, and then kind of being wrapped up in this huge, media storm at that age. I don't think kids, humans are really prepared for that. And, you know, the second theme for me is kind of looking at Johnny's mental issues because, he had bipolar disorder. He had, issues with drug addiction. When we got to the very serious, levels of his spiral, going through the pros and, kind of quitting on himself and giving up, like, he was ready to take his life. So I mean, to kind of think about all those things on top of what a cocktail like those issues might have with fame, money, drugs kind of poured into it. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster, and it kind of obviously spilled over in that way as Johnny kind of walked through his first couple of years as a pro. So I'm not going to sit here and say, Johnny had no part in this, like, poor Johnny, like through and through. Because I do think, he obviously made those decisions as well. He could have, maybe sought out the help that he needed. Maybe his family could have been, more supportive along the way as he was going through college. I mean, I know at some points his family was like, we couldn't get through to him. He wouldn't listen to us anymore. And, maybe that's just, you know, the output of what happens when all this stuff kind of comes together at the levels that it did for Johnny, like being in the spotlight all the time. Similar to another quarterback we're going to cover on this episode. So I don't know. I think those were some of the points that come away for me, kind of going through with it. I mean, I think when we do get to our next documentary series, I think we will see maybe some of the positive sides of what, good coaching, a good program, discipline and accountability really being a part of the program and amongst, the team members as well, guys picking each other up and trying to show each other, the right way to, go about, being almost a professional at the college level. So, I guess with all that being said, those were kind of some of the themes I took away from watching that documentary series.
Yeah, yeah, and to build off that, I don't like how you mentioned how Cliff Kingsbury definitely failed Manziel, and we definitely see that in the development of Kyler Murray, who, Kyler Murray is one of the most decorated Texas football high school athletes of all time, right? Like, has gotten all of the records again at Texas, which is like football heaven, so there is something I think towards blaming Cliff Kingsbury some here. And Menzel's dad kind of alluded to it a little bit. I don't know if anybody picked that up, because I think Menzel's dad said something along the lines of, when you give your son over to a university to the coaches, right? You expect them to, be disciplinarians, to hold them accountable for actions and such. And I think, Menzel's dad, and it was evidently so, they didn't actually fully hold Jenny Manziel accountable. They weren't disciplinarians for him or anything like that. And yeah, Cliff Kingsbury kind of laughed off some of Manziel's actions just to show how seriously I think he took or how serious Cliff Kingsbury took Manziel in a way. So, did he take him for granted? Probably, it felt like, and just rode on the coattails of Manziel's success, because apparently Manziel never read the playbook that I guess Cliff Kingsbury put together. So again, kind of showcasing like this evaluation of Cliff Kingsbury and what he was all about. So yeah, just I think a lot of failure there, and then also failure on the university. For sure, someone as well. Someone didn't really last that much longer after Manziel, right? So, but yeah, the university. I think one of Johnny Mandel's friends, the guy that was kind of partying along with him and along for the ride there. He kind of mentioned too that the university is like, yeah, in terms of like a support system, like there's like this expectation that probably the university has all this support and resources to help out with the Manziel, a person like Manziel, like with the PR stuff that's happening all around him. And he was like, no, it was me. Like it was me, a student, like was doing all this drunken buffoon helping Manziel. And that probably has an effect on them to this day, right? Even post Manziel's football career, just because apparently they don't talk to each other. So, and that was like his college best friend. So for me, there was a lot of accountability. I think that goes on. Yeah, the coaches for sure, but yeah, then also the overall athletic department there failed Johnny Manziel. And yeah, granted, sure, I think Manziel could have some resentment towards the university, NCAA, etc. But then there has to be some accountability too on Manziel and kind of that situation. But it's honestly hard for any of us to be put in that situation where you're treated like a god in the universe, not just the university. Like LeBron was talking to him, right? I think Drake, like everybody underneath the sun was like basically calling him or like treating him like a celebrity. So it's hard for me to be like, yeah, I would definitely be like the more Tim Tebow kind of quarterback or something. But honestly, I don't know if I could like last all all those gifts, all those people trying to pay me tens of thousands of dollars just to sign stuff and giving me courtside tickets. Like, yeah, I don't know if I could pull off those things that he did. So
Yeah, I think just going back to the coaches, each one of them got major raises. We're making, millions of dollars, on the back of Johnny. So in a lot of ways, it's like, hey, you know, I'm doing just enough to, make millions of dollars with Johnny. I'm not gonna stir the pot here. I'm not gonna, be the one who, disrupts any of this going on here. So just let him do what he wants, and we're gonna be paid. We're gonna be good, and that's all that really matters. And it kind of reminds me of a startup that, looking at Texas A&M, like a startup that just grows too fast. It's like getting way too much, VC dollars off the bat, and they just really didn't know what to do with it. You imagine like getting a pouring in of like almost $1 billion, and it's like they're just not accustomed to this. They didn't know like how do you treat a kid like Johnny, who's the biggest thing in college sports or in sports at the time. So it's like they didn't have the infrastructure to maybe surround him with the right people and go out and hire maybe a couple extra people like a sports psychologist or PR rep or a bodyguard. I don't know what else you could really do with a kid like that, but I think the other thing too, like you were mentioning the friend, it's kind of sad, like as the friend was talking about where the relationship is, he was just like, he got cut out because, Johnny had to become a professional and they had to do it in a professional type of way. And, you could definitely see there was like a lot of hurt there. And like, even Johnny himself, like, seemed to get choked up. I'm just like, man, why don't these two guys just like get in a room or give each other a call or something, like try to figure this out? Because, obviously they were, obviously really good friends there and went through some awesome times together. But I think also when you go through times like that too, you get to the next step of your life. It's like that almost looks like almost a complete party or kind of like a joke in a lot of ways too. So it's got to be kind of something maybe both of them don't want to re-entertain or re-explore with each other. But I'd figure after that documentary, they probably have talked at some extent here, some point. But yeah, I actually thought this was a really good documentary to put out there. I think it's probably helpful for a lot of kids that are, rising through AAU and, signing on with colleges now and kind of understanding like the landscape of what it means to be, a top college athlete. I think the landscape, like we were talking about, has also changed a bit. Kids getting these NIL deals, being able to make a little bit of money. So it's not this huge resentment issue where you have to hire a friend to, kind of do all this on the black market. And, hopefully those are, positive changes here. But I also just think, kind of looking at the industry, it's like, it's basically pro sports. You're just doing it with college kids. And it is in a lot of ways pretty shameful, that not only do these kids not have the opportunity to make the real bucks, but it just also just how much these universities stand to benefit from, trying these kids out there and exploiting them for all they're worth. It's kind of what makes college sports pretty ugly still. And, I understand where Johnny's coming from and his hatred for, the NCAA.
Yeah, I mean that's why he's he does the whole money sign and everything, right? It's kind of what he is. He's being very straightforward with kind of how he's feeling about everything. So, but yeah, it's like what would have the NIL looked like with Johnny Manziel, right? Would Johnny Manziel have been not going as crazy? Maybe he would have escalated more so. I don't know, but maybe he would have been in a better financial situation at least there, and maybe he doesn't have as much resentment towards the university and making a buck off of him too. So, yeah, it definitely could have been I feel like just this whole documentary just basically showcasing the reason for the NIL. And, I was talking to a friend about this. It's like, you go to Europe, at least maybe I'm framing more so the basketball situation, right? But it's like Europe has, student amateur athletes, right? Or not even amateur, but they're getting paid professionally to play, basketball or soccer at like 16 years old or 14 years old in some cases, right? It's like that, like if we're America and we're trying to teach people capitalism and all this stuff, it's like, well, we'll teach them earlier. Like, sure, like make sure that they have support and all that infrastructure's, kind of like what the university, Texas A&M should have done, right, with Manziel. But at the same time, like, if you're going to teach kids capitalism and how to like make a buck, be responsible with it too, you kind of have to, in a way, sometimes just give it to them in a way, like let them exploit it up, but create within that framework. Like, okay, you can get crazy NIL deals, but make sure you do it in the responsible way. Make sure you invest, put some in the side. All of that really ought to be part of the conversation. Not like, no, you're going to be an amateur and you're going to resent us for years and you might get hurt. But in the end of the day, hey, we foot your college bill, which I feel like has just become more of a joke of late. So, no, I'm all for. Like, I want to feel sorry for Manziel, but at the same time, I feel like there was definitely this dark side of him that I think just won him over. And yeah, kind of just sad to see like a really talented player, really exciting player, right? Just kind of throw it all away in a way. So yeah.
Yeah. I just also, I mentioned this point of it, the second point, but like he also wasn't right. So I think understanding like what bipolar disorder can do to a person, the suicidal thoughts down the road a little bit. I mean, I just don't want to discount that too much. Like I do know there are some dark sides to him, and like obviously he chose some of these routes, and there's domestic abuse, uh, situation that was brought up in the film too, like that kind of stuff. I don't know. Can bipolar disorder push you to those extents? Like it's possible, and I don't. I just I want to make sure that gets out there too, because if that wasn't identified and folks weren't giving him the kind of support he needed along the way, especially as things started to escalate, like, that wasted a lot of his career too. Like if he was on the right medication, like if he could have got medicated earlier on or could have got the treatment he needed, like could we be talking about a different story now? Maybe it'd still be involved in the partying and doing some bad things, but like would it have spiraled out in the way that it did too?
Yeah, no, that's a good point there because I mean, I've known some people with bipolar disorder, and when they go one path, they go hard, right? I think that's from my experience and what I know about it. So, yeah, if they were able to, if a sports psychologist or a psychologist in general, right, were to have a conversation, right, with Menzel maybe earlier on, I know he did rehab a little bit later, but honestly, it's like that was after all these things occurred. So if he were to have seen like one, like maybe as a freshman, right, which that definitely is like a very vulnerable point towards him, where he were to, open up and maybe they were able to diagnose him there and then have some sort of support system to be like, hey, here's a path to like make sure that you're in a good situation, knowing that, oh, you're getting all this exposure from LeBron, you're getting all this exposure from all these different parties and stuff like that, which nobody was overseeing. So like that's just where I think it was such a major failure on the Texas A&M part. So yeah, I think that can definitely have helped. Would have Johnny Manziel's situation been any different? That's really hard to say. So, but at the same time, like man, Texas A&M, I think they really. I think if I were to pick a loser out of this documentary, I feel like it would be Texas A&M number one, just of how they handled everything there. So I will want to say the most hilarious person was the agent. I think uh, uh,
Yeah.
he was just like, dude, I tried everything I could. I was like, make sure, no, like you will not go to the combine. You will not because I do not trust you whatsoever. Like, for you to do anything there. Oh, you're gonna pee out of a cup? Like, you're like that's your plan to get out of drug testing? Like, or like to yeah, just drink a bunch of water and just get it out of your system. Like, I almost felt sorry for him, and eventually I think yeah he kind of let go of Johnny Manziel as a client just because he had enough of him. But I just found that whole thing hilarious though. So
Yeah, like he made his agent like be one of his receivers at the combine because he got all the real receivers drunk the night before. So it was like, just imagining like an agent and like a scout or somebody else like getting on the line just to, go out and catch balls. And hey, man, it got him drafted in the first round. So, cheers to the agent. And I mean, that's magic, man. That is true magic.
yeah, yeah, and then what he also like asked he asked Menzel's dad to like check into the hospital or something to like lie so that Menzel can excuse himself for an emergency, like oh my dad's in the hospital types. Like that's next level, but hey, when we're talking about first round, we're talking about millions of dollars, right, from sliding down, then yeah, maybe you just go check in the hospital. Hey Johnny, here's the medical bill. Oh, it's only a couple grand. Whatever, I can do that. So, no, that whole situation was hysterical. And then yeah, one more thing that at least I noticed too was I looked at the quarterbacks that were drafted afterwards. Some of them are still playing actually. Terry Bridgewater, Derek Carr, and Jimmy Garoppolo, all drafted after Johnny Manziel there. So, man, that Browns first round pick there. I think they might have traded up, I think, or something. But either way, spending a first round draft pick there when, yeah, there's Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Terry Bridgewater there. Oh, man. Yeah, that Browns organization, they know how to pick them quarterbacks, apparently. So,
Man, yeah, they're just completely doomed, and we'll see how their season goes too with Deshaun. But yeah, the only other thing as you were going on the age, and I was thinking about the friend too, and his ability to kind of swindle, his way to obviously having Johnny make a bunch of money and all those good things, but like the oil money stories that they were, pumping out there, and then also having like the grandparent basically writing off checks to Johnny, based on them funneling money to him. So like again, this whole like network of Johnnies like did him no favors, and like just really nobody was there to kind of like curtail a lot of his own funds. So it definitely got carried away, and it shows on all levels here.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens when you got. Honestly, it's like yeah, you put the kids in charge, and I mean I don't know. I gotta credit the friend though, right? Like this is definitely where like that's a ride or die. Like you're kind of committing fraud, like you know. So and you got Skip Bayless to say you talk about Johnny Manziel's oil money, like that's is just hysterical. But then that just goes to show you why there's so much distrust in the media too. It's like, well, you guys are really doing too much research here. I feel like so. But yeah, that friend, man, like that is a ride or die. I feel like so that's just nuts how that all transpired.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you guys are, around looking for, good sports documentary to throw on there, highly recommend Johnny Football on Netflix. As part one of our series here on covering some football and Netflix.